Hey y'all. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about this conversation that I'm having in a spiritual forum online where the question was, why does racism still exist in this country? And, this is a spiritual conversation. So of course there's going to be people of different races chiming in on the conversation. And what I notice is that there's a consistent narrative amongst white people in the spiritual community that we are all one human race. And because we're all one human race, we need to get along, but there's ethnocentrism. This sprinkle of spirituality, it is not getting the whole picture, right? We are biological, psychological, spiritual beings, right? Biopsychosocial and social, right? We are social beings. We're spiritual beings, we're physical beings, and we're living this physical experience. And in this lived experience, right, we encounter racism, right? And everyone plays a part. Even a white person has to go through their own racial identity development, right? And when we think about that, you can be spiritual and tap into the Akashic records, or you're speaking to your ancestors who have passed on, who now see the grand scheme of things, still themselves, right? But see the grand scheme of things. You're talking to your angels, you're talking to ascended masters, and they're giving you their understanding of race, right? Or just your everyday life experience, and they don't see race in the same way, right? They just don't. But what you can recognize is that your ancestors have different lived experiences and still have a spiritual experience of trauma, right? So there's a spiritual lens that they have of trauma, of racialized trauma, ethnic central attacks, right? This is all traumatic, and the ancestors have a different perspective than the angels, and the angels are going to have a different perspective than the ascended masters. The different gods are going to have different perspectives on the issue of race, right? But when we think about this lived experience psychologically, right, on a micro level, interpersonal interactions with your friends, with your community, in your neighborhood, anybody can experience discrimination, right? You can be discriminated against because of the color of your skin, because of your gender, your sexuality, right? You can be discriminated against, but right, it is different when we talk about racism, right? People of color cannot be racists in the United States of America. And here is why, right? Racism is about power. Power exists on the macro level, the level of the government, the level of law, and it trickles down, right, to the micro level. You interact with the law all the time. The law is the reasons why we can relatively walk the streets safely, why we don't have to worry about bombings and like terrorist attacks or ethnocentral attacks it is in other countries, right? We don't have to worry about that because we have systems, we have laws that impact us on a daily basis. But when we think about systems, right, the school system, the economic system, immigrations and borders, which is essentially the federal government, right, politics, all of these systems are essentially under the majority rule, majority control of white people, right? You see that the systems were created to have a direct path for white people to have control over the country. This is historical, right? Till this day, because of this direct path that was created for white people to be at the top, no matter what, right? The country is going to continue on. They had people immigrated here. We had slaves who were free, right? White people knew this, right? When they were, or the possibility of slaves being free. White people knew this when they drafted the Articles of Confederation, and they created these systems for how people will live, right? They knew that they would have to have white people in power, and we have white people in power to this day, right? If we look at how power impacts us on a micro level, you interact with the government. When you vote, right, you are directly impacting the government. Now, if we think about the only group of people, the only race in this country to have discriminated against any other group, any other race, simply on the basis that they are a part of that race, we take a look at white people, especially in the United States of America. There has been no time where Black people, Latino people, Native American people, essentially Indigenous peoples, Asian Americans have gathered together across the country to impact another group of people, even white people, en masse, right? And this is the basis for the attack, is that they're white, right? So people of color have never attacked white people off the basis that there are whites across the country, across mass populations of people. One mass population of one group of people has never came after white people, right? And white people suffered simply because they were white. It has never happened, right? We look at this past election as an example. Look at the moniker of Donald Trump, right? One of the monikers, right? Let's build a wall to keep these brown people from Mexico from coming in. And this was an emotional heuristic, an emotional shortcut for, right, white people who are only given the narrative that racism doesn't exist, right? Divide and conquer, you're low income, blame the Black and the brown peoples, right? We look at that and we're thinking about how there has been no other group that can possibly target white people for the sake of being white. Not saying that that should be the direction that we should even go in. We shouldn't think about divide and conquer. But in order for us to heal ourselves, right, in order for us to grow as a society, as a mass population of people, we have to take accountability for ourselves. Mass population of people, right, we're talking about a large level. To get it down to you, to the individual, communities have to change. States have to change, right? Culture has to change. And that impacts the individual and the individual choices that we make. So everyone has to be accountable for themselves. If you want to be accountable for yourself, there are racial identity development scales out there for every single racial group. There are identity scales for white people, for Black people, for Latino people, Indigenous people. Everyone has a racial identity development scale living in a country with so many cultures, right? That ethnocentrism is bound to happen, right? So if you want to think about how can I grow in my racial identity, look at the racial identity development scales and read books. Books are amazing, right? And the more you better yourself, the more you're going to better people around you and your everyday life. So when people start talking about race, you're more knowledgeable about how to advance through mentality. Once you advance through your mentality, the way you perceive and think about the world, you're going to advance spiritually, right? It just comes hand in hand. You'll even advance physically. Your whole structure will begin to change because we are biopsychosocial, spiritual beings, right? So I think part of us growing out of this rising animosity in terms of race, ethnocentrism in the United States is us looking at ourselves and impacting those around us based on us taking full accountability of where we are in our development, right? So that's my thoughts for today on racism and how do we apply it spiritually. Until next time.